April 3, 1942, Mount Samat, Bataan Peninsula, late morning. The air doesn't just tremble, it howls. A low, distant vibration rolls across the dry slopes like thunder trapped beneath the earth. Then it grows louder, sharper, closer. And suddenly, the sky breaks open. Bombs fall in long, whistling arcs, slicing through the heat-heavy air. The ground erupts in violent bursts, earth, rock, and splintered bamboo thrown skyward in jagged fountains. You can almost feel the concussion in your chest before you hear it. Men press themselves deeper into shallow foxholes, fingers clawing into loose soil as if the earth itself could swallow them whole. Above them, the sky is no longer blue. It's metal. Dozens, no, hundreds of aircraft swarm overhead in tight formations. Bombers glide with mechanical precision while fighter planes dive like predators, engines screaming, machine guns stitching the ground with fire. There is no pause, no rhythm, no mercy. Just continuous destruction. On the forward slopes of Mount Samat, Captain Paul Ashton watches it unfold. Hours earlier, he had stood at the crest, looking out across the plains toward Balanga and Pillar. It had seemed almost peaceful, then quiet farmland under a pale sky. But even from that distance, he had seen it. Gun flashes. Too many to count. Now he understands what they meant. The bombardment begins not as a single strike, but as a wave. Then another. Then another. Each one closer than the last. Artillery shells slant into the mountainside in precise, creeping lines, walking their way upward, step by step, as if an invisible hand is dragging destruction toward the summit. The ground shifts beneath Ashton's boots. Trees splinter and collapse. Dry brush ignites instantly, flames licking upward in hungry tongues. And above it all, the planes never leave. They circle. They watch. They strike again. For the American and Filipino defenders, there is something far more terrifying than the sheer volume of fire. It's the accuracy. Every time a U.S. artillery piece fires just once, a thin trail of smoke curls into the air. That's all it takes. Somewhere high above, a Japanese spotter plane sees it. Coordinates are radioed in seconds. And then, almost instantly, death answers. A fighter peels off from formation. A bomb drops. And the gun falls silent. One by one, the American artillery positions are hunted down, not blindly, but deliberately, methodically, like prey. You can almost feel the helplessness spreading across the line. There's nowhere to hide. A U.S. officer would later describe it with chilling simplicity. Every few minutes, a plane would drop down, lift up a tree branch, and lay 1 or 2 eggs. Eggs. That's what they called the bombs. As if naming them something harmless might somehow soften the reality. But there is nothing harmless about this. Men moving along communication lines are cut down in seconds. A truck engine turning over becomes a death sentence. Even a single soldier running between cover draws fire from the sky. Movement equals death. Stillness equals waiting for it. Somewhere along a dirt road, Captain Alvin Powellate is riding in a jeep. The engine rattles over uneven ground, kicking up dust. Around him, wounded soldiers lie on makeshift stretchers, groaning softly, some barely conscious. Then someone shouts. Planes! It happens instantly. The sound hits before the sight, a sharp, rising whine, then the fighters are overhead, diving fast. Powellate and the others leap from the jeep, hitting the dirt just as machine gun fire tears through the road. Bullets rip into metal, into flesh. Men scream. Others don't get the chance. The first pass ends. Silence. But only for a moment. The planes circle back. Then, and again. For nearly an hour, they return, strafing, bombing, hunting anything that moves. Powellate tries to treat the wounded, pressing bandages against torn bodies, but each attempt is interrupted by another attack. Each time they try to move the injured, the planes come back. It becomes a deadly pattern. Help them and you die with them. Leave them and they die alone. Back on Mount Samat, the bombardment intensifies. It's no longer just artillery and bombs. It's everything. The Japanese have brought nearly 200 artillery pieces into position, massive guns, some firing shells so large they seem to tear the sky apart as they pass overhead. Hidden within a tight area near Balanga, they unleash a storm that the defenders cannot answer. Because their own guns are gone, or silent, or waiting for the moment they fire, knowing it will be their last. And then, something new. Something strange. Another formation of bombers approaches. The men on the ground brace themselves, expecting the familiar, deafening whistle of falling explosives. But it doesn't come. Instead, there is silence. Objects fall from the sky, thin, stick-like shapes tumbling end over end. For a split second, no one understands. Then they hit the ground, and the world catches fire. Flames erupt instantly, spreading across the dry terrain with terrifying speed. The slopes of Mount Samat, covered in brittle grass, bamboo, and sugar cane, ignite like tinder. Small fires merge into larger ones, then into a wall, then into an inferno. Heat builds rapidly, pressing against the soldiers like a physical force. Smoke thickens, choking the air, blinding eyes, filling lungs. Men begin to panic. They have faced bombs. They have faced bullets. But this is something else. Fire doesn't just kill. It hunts. Positions that had held for hours suddenly become death traps. Foxholes fill with smoke. Escape routes vanish behind walls of flame. Orders don't come. Communications are gone, burned, shattered, cut off. And so men make their own decisions. Run and risk the artillery. Stay and burn alive. Some choose to run. They don't make it far. Shells crash down around them, tearing apart bodies already weakened by hunger and exhaustion. Others stay, curled into the earth, hoping the fire will pass over them. For many, it doesn't. What had once been a defensive line is no longer a line at all. It's chaos. Fragments of units, isolated groups, individuals. And through the smoke, through the fire, through the shattered remains of what had been a carefully constructed defense, shapes begin to move. Purposeful. Japanese infantry. Advancing. The bombardment has done more than destroy positions. It has broken the structure of the defense itself. And now, as the fire rages and the smoke thickens, the next phase begins. The ground assault. And what the defenders don't yet realize is that this isn't just an attack. It's a blitzkrieg. Coordinated. Relentless. And already, it's working. Somewhere along the collapsing line, a Filipino sergeant looks back and sees it for the first time. Not just retreat. Not just confusion. But a tap. What? Oh then. Undefended. And pouring through it. The enemy. The line isn't bending. It's breaking. And Mount Samat is about to be surrounded. The fire doesn't die. It spreads. It consumes everything in its path: dry grass, bamboo groves, abandoned foxholes, and the fragile line that once held the defenders together. And through it, they come. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, just as the bombardment reaches its peak, the Japanese ground assault begins. There is no dramatic pause, no signal flare, no moment to recover. Just movement. Disciplined, coordinated, but from behind the curtain of smoke and flame, infantry units of General Akira Nara's 65th Brigade push forward, supported by elements of the 7th Tank Regiment. Their objective is precise Trail 29, a narrow but vital artery feeding into the network that encircles Mount Samat. They are not advancing blindly. They know exactly where to go, because the battlefield has already been shaped for them. Where there had once been resistance, there is now silence. Burned-out positions. Collapsed trenches. Bodies, some still clutching rifles, others curled into the earth where they had tried to escape the fire. The defenders of the 42nd Infantry Regiment, Filipino troops who had held their ground through hours of bombardment, are no longer a cohesive force. They are scattered, broken into fragments. And the Japanese move through those fragments like water through cracks in stone. At first, the advance is cautious. Rifles raised, eyes scanning, expecting resistance. But it doesn't come. Not in the way they anticipated. Instead, they find empty foxholes, abandoned machine gun nests, and trails littered with the debris of a retreat that was never ordered, only force. Then the realization hits. The line has collapsed. Like a dam giving way under pressure, the withdrawal of the 42nd Infantry begins to spill outward into adjacent units, into neighboring sectors, into the very structure of the defense itself. To the right, the 43rd Infantry sees the movement. Men running. Others shouting. Some burned, some wounded, all moving in the same direction back. And in war, retreat is contagious. Within minutes, cohesion begins to unravel. Orders are lost in the noise. Officers try to regroup their men, but the smoke blinds them, the fire blocks them, and the artillery still falls around them in relentless waves. What begins as a localized collapse becomes something far more dangerous. A chain reaction. General Nara arrives at the front later that afternoon. He expects resistance. Hard fighting. Heavy casualties. Instead, what he finds is almost unbelievable. A corridor. Wide. Empty. Nearly 1,600 yards across. It shouldn't exist. Not here, not on a battlefield that had been so heavily defended just hours earlier. But it does. And Nara doesn't hesitate. He pushes his forces forward. Vest. To the east, another Japanese unit, the 61st Infantry of the 4th Division, moves in parallel, supported by a dozen tanks grinding forward over shattered ground. Their engines roar against the backdrop of distant explosions, tracks crushing debris as they advance. They too encounter little resistance. Just more empty positioned. More signs of sudden withdrawal. More evidence that the defensive line is no longer a line at all. By the time the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, the situation has changed completely. What had begun as an assault on a fortified position has become a breakthrough. And not just any breakthrough. A decisive one. Nearly two-thirds of the Japanese objective for the day has already been achieved. Trail 429, one of the critical routes encircling Mount Samat, is within reach. And with it, the possibility of isolating the mountain entirely. But for the men on the ground, none of this feels like strategy. It feels like survival. Sergeant Silvestro Teguerao of the 42nd Infantry stumbles through the smoke, lungs burning, eyes stinging from ash and heat. His uniform is scorched. His unit, what's left of it, is scattered around him. He remembers waiting in his foxhole earlier that day, listening to the incoming shells, bracing for the inevitable assault. He remembers the fire. The way it had come without warning. The way it had forced them out, not because they wanted to leave, but because they had no choice. And now, there is nothing left to hold. He reaches what should have been his command posts. But it's gone. Collapsed. Silent. Inside, there's only a single body lying on a stretcher. No officers. No orders. No direction. For a moment, everything stops. Not the battle rages on all around him. But inside his mind. Because this is the moment it becomes clear. They're no longer fighting as a unit. They're simply trying to survive. As darkness approaches, the battlefield is not quiet. Fires continue to burn across the slopes of Mount Samat, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Smoke drifts upward, mixing with the last light of day, turning the sky into a hazy, blood-colored veil. And through it all, the Japanese continue to move. Not recklessly, but with purpose. This is not chaos. This is design. The assault has been executed with precision, air power neutralizing artillery, incendiaries breaking defensive positions, ground forces exploiting the resulting gaps. It's a method that would have been familiar to any German officer watching from Europe. A form of warfare built on speed, coordination, and shock. A blitzkrieg. And it's working even better than expected. General Masaharu Hama, the architect of the operation, had anticipated a slow, grinding battle for Bataan. A month, perhaps more. Heavy resistance. High casualties. Instead, by the end of the first day, his forces are already deep inside the enemy's defensive network. The timetable has been shattered. But success brings its own challenges. The advance has been so rapid that supply lines struggle to keep up. Tanks outrun their fuel. Infantry units push ahead of their support. At times, the offensive must pause not because of enemy resistance, but because the machine driving it forward is moving too fast for itself. Still, the momentum is undeniable. And it will not stop. At first light the next morning, April 4th, the attack resumes. At this time, there will be even less to stop it. Because what remains of the Allied defense is no longer organized, no longer coordinated, no longer capable of holding a continuous line. The Japanese shift their focus westward, pressing into the positions of the 21st Division under General Matteo Capinpin. Another bombardment begins shorter, but just as intense. Then the tanks roll in, followed by infantry. Within hours, the result is the same. Collapse. By mid-morning, entire regiments are pushed off the main line. Positions that had been held for weeks are abandoned in minutes. And the gap grows wider. In less than a day and a half, a 3-mile-wide sector of the defensive line in front of Mount Samat is gone. Erased. And now, the mountain itself is exposed. Vulnerable. But the most dangerous part isn't what's happening on the ground. It's what's about to happen around it. Because the Japanese are no longer just breaking through the line. They are moving to encircle it. Trail by trail. Position by position. They are closing the ring. And once it closes, there will be no escape. Dawn comes slowly over Mount Samat. Not with light, but with smoke. It hangs low over the mountain, thick and unmoving, clinging to the slopes like a suffocating blanket. The fires from the previous day still burn, smoldering beneath ash and debris, sending thin columns upward into a sky that hasn't been clear in days. Somewhere in that haze, men are still alive. Hungry, exhausted, disoriented. Waiting. Then the sound returns. Aircraft. Distant at first, then closer. April 5th, 1942. Easter Sunday. But here, there is no stillness, no prayer, no pause. Only continuation. The bombardment begins again, shorter than before, but no less precise. Bombs fall along the western slope of Mount Samat, tearing into what remains of the defensive positions. Artillery follows, hammering the ridgelines, targeting anything that might still resemble organized resistance. But the truth is, there isn't much left to hit. What remains of the Allied line is fragmented. Units have lost contact with each other. Communication lines are destroyed. Command posts are gone or abandoned. Men fight in isolated pockets, often unaware of what's happening just a few hundred yards away. Some still believe the line is holding. Others already know it's gone. And the Japanese, they know exactly what they're doing. After securing Trails 6 and 429 the day before, their next objective is clear. Trail 4, the final piece. The last link needed to complete the encirclement of Mount Samat. If they take it, the mountain is cut off. Isolated. Surrounded. The assault begins just after sunrise. Infantry move first, advancing up the western slope in coordinated formations. Behind them, tanks grind forward wherever the terrain allows, their engines echoing through the hills like distant thunder. There is resistance. But it's scattered. Uneven. Then, suddenly, it stiffened. On the reverse slope of Mount Samat, something unexpected happens. American artillery opens fire. The guns of the 41st Field Artillery Battalion, old, worn, and nearly forgotten in the chaos, come alive with sudden precision. Their 75 pieces, relics of an earlier war, bark into action. Shells arc over the crest of the mountain and slam into advancing Japanese units with devastating accuracy. For the first time in days, the advance slows. You can almost feel the shift. Momentum interrupted. Observers, positioned high on what remains of the mountain's heights, call out coordinates, adjusting fire with practiced efficiency. Each correction brings the shells closer, tighter, deadlier. Japanese troops, who had advanced with near impunity just hours earlier, are suddenly pinned down. Forced to take cover. Forced to react. It's not enough to stop the offensive, but it's enough to delay it. And in war, sometimes delay is everything. For a brief moment, Mount Samat fights back. But the advantage doesn't last. It never could. The Japanese adapt quickly. Spotter planes return overhead, circling like hawks. They identify the artillery positions, mark them, and then they strike. Bombers descend through the smoke, releasing payloads directly onto the reverse slopes. Fighter planes follow, strafing the gun crews, forcing them to abandon their positions or die where they stand. One by one, the guns fall silent. And with them, the last coordinated resistance on Mount Samat begins to fade. By early afternoon, Japanese infantry reach the heights. Not in a dramatic charge. Not in a final, desperate clash. But steadily. Relentlessly. Step by step. The defenders they encounter are no longer organized units. They are individuals, small groups, men who have been fighting, retreating, surviving for days without rest, without food, without clear orders. Some fire as long as they can. Others simply watch as the inevitable unfolds. At approximately 1 p.m. the summit of Mount Samat is effectively in Japanese hands. It doesn't feel like victory. Not here. Not in this moment. There's no flag raised, no triumphant cry. Just silence. Broken only by distant gunfire and the crackle of burning vegetation. But strategically, it changes everything. From the heights of Mount Samat, Japanese observers now have a clear view of the surrounding terrain. They can direct artillery with precision, track movement, control the battlefield, and more importantly, they have completed the encirclement. Trail 4 is secure. Trail 6 and 429 already in their hands. The ring is closed. Mount Samat is no longer a defensive position. It's a trap. Below, in the valleys and along the remaining defensive lines, American and Filipino troops begin to feel it. The pressure, the tightening. Units attempting to reposition find their routes cut off. Supply lines vanish. Communication becomes impossible. Every direction leads to the same realization. There is no safe path left. And still, the Japanese keep moving. Reinforcements arrive in the afternoon, pushing through the newly captured trails, consolidating gains, tightening control over the mountain and its approaches. What resistance remains is isolated quickly. Overwhelmed. Silenced. By 4:30 p.m. the situation is beyond recovery. The Japanese have done in 3 days what was expected to take weeks. General Masaharu Hama's gamble to strike hard, fast, and directly at the strongest point of the Allied line has paid off. Not just in success, but in speed. Too much speed. In some sectors, the advance has outpaced its own logistics. Supplies lag behind. Units pause not because they are stopped, but because they have nothing left to push forward with. Fuel, ammunition, all struggling to keep up with the pace of victory. And yet, it doesn't matter. Not anymore. Because the battle has already been decided. What remains is not a question of if Bataan will fall, but when. Far to the south, remnants of Allied forces begin pulling back, some in organized withdrawal, others in scattered retreat. They move toward the last defensive positions. Toward the final line. Toward what they hope will be a chance to hold just a little longer. But even as they move, the reality is setting in. They are not regrouping. They are being pushed. And the Japanese are not slowing down. 6 days. That's all it will take. 6 days to break an army. 6 days to collapse a peninsula. 6 days to turn a desperate defense into a final surrender. But before that surrender comes, there is one last phase. One final realization. Because even now, as Mount Samat burns behind them, many of the men retreating south don't yet understand what's truly happening. They think this is just another fallback. Another line to hold. Another chance. It isn't, and very soon, they're going to find out. The road south is already crowded. Not with organized columns. Not with marching units. But with men. They move in clusters, some limping, some carrying the wounded, others simply walking with empty expressions, rifles hanging loosely from their hands. There's no formation. No command. Just movement. Dust rises beneath their boots, mixing with the smoke that still drifts down from Mount Samat behind them. The air smells of ash, sweat, and something worse, something metallic and heavy. You can almost taste it. Somewhere along the line, an officer tries to rally a group. Hold here, regroup here. But the words don't stick. The men hear them. They just don't respond. Because deep down, they already know. This isn't a repositioning. This isn't a tactical withdrawal. This is collapse. In the days leading up to this moment, the defenders of Bataan had already been pushed to their limits. Food was scarce, sometimes non-existent. Ammunition was rationed carefully, every round counted. Disease spread through the ranks: malaria, dysentery, exhaustion. Men fought not just the enemy, but their own failing bodies. And now, after the blitz on Mount Samat, whatever strength remained has been shattered. Entire regiments no longer exist as fighting units. Command structures are broken. Communication is gone. All that remains are survivors. To the north, Japanese forces continue to press forward with relentless efficiency. Infantry units advance along the captured trail network, spreading outward like branches from a trunk. Tanks follow where they can, using roads and cleared paths to maintain pressure on the retreating enemy. They don't need to rush. Not anymore. Because there is nowhere left to go. The geography of Bataan itself now works against the defenders. A narrow peninsula, bounded by water on both sides, with only one direction left. And that's exactly where the Japanese are driving them. Along the East Road, remnants of General Mateo Capinpin's 21st Division attempt to establish a defensive line. It's thin, fragile, but it's something. For a brief moment, there is resistance. Rifles crack. Machine guns chatter. Men dig shallow positions into the hard ground, trying to create some semblance of order from the chaos. Then the artillery begins again. Shells fall with practiced precision, targeting concentrations of troops, supply points, anything that might slow the advance. The line buckles almost immediately. And then come the tanks. They appear through the haze like dark silhouettes, growing larger with each passing second. Tracks grinding. Engines roaring. Unstoppable. Some soldiers fire at them rifles, machine guns, anything they have. It's not enough. A few try improvised weapons, Molotov cocktails, hastily prepared, thrown with desperate accuracy. Some hit. Flames burst across metal surfaces. But even then, it's not enough. The tanks keep coming. Behind them, Japanese infantry advances in tight coordination, exploiting every gap, every weakness, every hesitation. They move with confidence now. Because they've seen it. They know the line is broken. By mid-morning, the attempt to hold the East Road collapses completely. Once again, the retreat begins. But this time, it's faster. More desperate. Men throw away equipment to move quicker. Some abandon rifles. Others carry wounded comrades until they physically can't anymore, and then they have to make a choice no soldier ever wants to make. Leave them behind. Or die with them. Along the roadside, the cost of that decision becomes visible. Wounded soldiers lie where they've been placed, some calling out weakly, others silent, staring upward at a sky that no longer brings hope. Medics move among them, doing what little they can. But supplies are gone. Bandages are reused. Morphine is scarce. Every decision is a compromise. Every action feels insufficient. Somewhere further down the line, a group of American artillerymen attempts to set up their guns for one last stand. They work quickly, efficiently, muscle memory guiding their movements even as exhaustion weighs them down. The first shell is loaded. Flare. For a moment, it feels like control. Like resistance. Then the planes arrive. They always arrive. The artillery position is spotted almost immediately. Bombs fall. Explosions rip through the area. The guns are destroyed before they can fire more than a handful of rounds. The pattern repeats itself across the peninsula. Again, and again, and again. Any attempt to resist is identified, targeted, eliminated. By the afternoon of April 6th, the situation is beyond salvage. The Allied forces on Bataan are no longer a cohesive army. They are a mass of retreating, starving, exhausted men being pushed steadily toward the southern tip of the peninsula. And still, the Japanese advance continues. But something unusual happens. For the second time during the campaign, the Japanese are forced to pause their offensive. Not because of resistance, but because of success. Their advance has been so rapid, so effective that their supply lines cannot keep up. Fuel runs low. Ammunition needs replenishing. Units become temporarily disorganized, not from defeat, but from momentum. It's a strange moment. A brief pause in an otherwise unstoppable tide. But it doesn't last. Because while the Japanese regroup, the defenders have nothing left to rebuild with. No reserves. No reinforcements. No supplies. Only time. And very little of it. Far to the south, commanders begin to understand the full scope of the situation. Among them is General Edward P. He sees what others are only beginning to realize. The line is gone. The mountain is lost. The army is broken. And continuing to fight will not change the outcome. It will only increase the suffering. By surrender. That's a word no one wants to say. Not yet. Not here. Not after everything they've endured. So, the retreat continues. Step by step. Mile by mile. Toward an ending that is now unavoidable. And as the sun sets over Bataan once again, casting long shadows across a broken landscape, one question remains. How much longer can they hold on? When there's nothing left to hold. Night falls over southern Bataan. But it doesn't bring rest. The darkness is thick, humid, suffocating. It presses in from all sides, wrapping around the exhausted men who now crowd the last remaining defensive areas of the peninsula. There are no proper lines anymore. No clear front. Just clusters of soldiers, American and Filipino, trying to hold on to whatever fragments of order still exists. Some sit silently, backs against trees, heads slumped forward. Others lie on the ground, too weak to move, staring into nothing. A few still clean their rifles. Out of habit. Out of discipline. Out of denial. Because deep down, they all feel it. The end is close. Food is gone. Not low. Not scarce. For days now, men have been surviving on reduced rations, thin rice gruel, scraps of whatever could be found. Now even that has disappeared. Stomachs cramp with hunger. Bodies weaken. Strength fades. And yet, the battle continues. In makeshift medical stations scattered through the jungle, the situation is even worse. Wounded soldiers lie shoulder to shoulder on bamboo stretchers or directly on the ground. Some are bandaged, others are not. There isn't enough of anything. Not bandages. Not medicine. Not time. Doctors and medics move from one man to another, doing what they can. But it's never enough. It can't be. A surgeon pauses over a patient, hands hovering for just a moment longer than they should. Because he knows. Even if the man survives the wound, he won't survive what comes next. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery continues. Closer now. Always closer. The Japanese are not rushing. They don't need to. Their victory is already assured. Instead, they advance steadily, tightening their grip on the southern tip of Bataan, cutting off escape routes, eliminating isolated pockets of resistance, applying pressure constant, unrelenting. For the defenders, there is no relief, no rotation, no reinforcement. Only the slow realization that this fight cannot be won. In a dimly lit command post, General Edward P. King studies a map spread across a rough wooden table. But the map no longer reflects reality. Units marked on paper no longer exist in the field. Positions that should be held aren't. Lines that should be connected are broken. Officers stand around him, silent, waiting. They don't need a briefing. They already know. King's face is drawn, his uniform worn, his posture heavy with the weight of command. He has seen the reports. He has heard the accounts. He has watched the steady disintegration of his forces. And now he must make a decision. Continue the fight. Or end it. Neither option feels like victory. Outside, the sound of movement draws attention. Columns of soldiers continue to drift south, arriving in waves, some organized, many not. They bring stories with them. Stories of burned positions, overrun lines, lost units. One officer describes the firebombing. Another talks about tanks rolling through empty foxholes. A third simply shakes his head and says nothing at all. Each account adds another piece to the picture. A picture that is already painfully clear. The army is no longer capable of organized resistance. And yet, the order to surrender has not been given. Why? Because surrender is more than a military decision. It's a moral one. A psychological one. A final admission that everything, the fighting, the sacrifice, the loss, has led to this moment. And for many, that is harder to accept than death itself. But King is not thinking about pride. He is thinking about men. Tens of thousands of them. Starving. Wounded. exhausted beyond measure. He knows what will happen if the fighting continues. More bombardment. More fire. More death. And for what? There is no reinforcement coming. No relief force on the horizon. No hidden reserve waiting to counterattack. Only the inevitable. Somewhere in the darkness, a soldier whispers to another, "Do you think we'll make it out?" The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Because the truth is, most of them already know the answer. Dawn approaches slowly. Another day. Another chance to fight. Or to end it. As the first light begins to creep over the horizon on April 7th, the Japanese advance resumes. Closer now than ever before. Skirmishes erupt along the remaining defensive pockets. Short. Violent. Decisive. There is no depth left in the defense. No fallback positions. No second line. Every engagement feels like the last. And for many, it is. By midday, reports reach King's headquarters that Japanese forces are within striking distance of the final command areas. Artillery shells begin to fall dangerously close. The sound is unmistakable. They are closing in. There is no more time. Inside the command post, the decision can no longer be delayed. General King looks down at the map one last time. Then slowly, he straightens. The room is silent. Because everyone knows what comes next. The order that will end the battle. And begin something far worse. King turns to his officers, takes a breath, and prepares to speak. The moment arrives quietly. No drum roll. No ceremony. Just a decision. Inside the dim command post, General Edward P. King stands still for a long moment after speaking. The words hang in the air. Heavy. Final. Unavoidable. He will surrender. Not tomorrow. Not after one last stand. Now. Around him, his officers don't react immediately. Some stare at the ground. Others close their eyes. A few nod slowly, reluctantly. Because deep down, they know. There was no other choice. To continue fighting would not be bravery. It would be destruction. Pointless. Total. Outside, the first signs begin to spread. Not through announcements. Not through official channels. But through whispers. It's over. At first, no one believes it. How could they? After everything they've endured. After weeks of holding on with nothing left. It can't end like this. But then, slowly, reality sets in. Officers begin moving through what remains of their units, giving quiet instructions. Weapons are to be clean, not fire. Equipment is to be gathered, but not used. And most importantly, a white flag is to be prepared. For many soldiers, the act feels surreal. Some sit in silence, staring at their rifles. Others hold them tightly, as if letting go would mean losing a part of themselves. One man carefully wipes dirt from his weapon. Not out of necessity, but out of respect. Because this rifle has been his lifeline, his protection, his identity. And now, he has to lay it down. Elsewhere, a group of Filipino soldiers gathers beneath a tree. One of them asks the question no one wants to say out loud. What happens to us now? No one answered. Because no one knows. By mid-morning, preparations are complete. A small party is assembled. Officers. A driver. A white flag. General King steps forward. There is no escort of honor. No ceremony. Just a simple vehicle waiting on a dirt road. He climbs in. As the jeep begins to move north toward Japanese lines, the silence is overwhelming. The road is lined with soldiers, American and Filipino, watching as their commanding general drives past. Some stand at attention. Others simply watch. Expressionless. A few raise their hands in quiet salute. Not to victory, but to acknowledgement. Because this moment marks the end. The jeep continues forward, moving through a landscape that no longer resembles a battlefield. Burned out positions. Abandoned equipment. Bodies left where they fell. The cost of the past days is everywhere. Visible. Unavoidable. As they approach Japanese lines, the tension shifts. This is no longer about combat. It's about uncertainty. What will the enemy do? Will they accept the surrender? Will they honor it? Or will something worse follow? The vehicle slows. Japanese soldiers appear ahead armed, alert, watching closely. Rifles ready. The white flag flutters in the still air. For a moment, everything hangs in balance. Then, the soldiers lower their weapons slightly. The message is understood. General King steps out of the vehicle. His uniform is worn, his face drawn, but his posture remains firm. He walks forward alone. Each step deliberate, measured, heavy, because he is not just walking toward the enemy. He is carrying the fate of tens of thousands of men with him. A Japanese officer approaches. The two men stop a short distance apart. For a brief moment, they simply look at each other. No words, just understanding. Then the formalities begin. The surrender of Bataan. Behind them, the battlefield falls silent. Not completely, but enough. The sound of gunfire fades. Artillery ceases. Planes no longer circle overhead. For the first time in days, there is something close to peace. But it doesn't feel like relief. Because for the soldiers still waiting in the south, the end of the battle is not the end of their suffering. It is only the beginning. As word spreads through the ranks, reactions vary. Some men collapse where they stand, too exhausted to process what has happened. Others sit quietly, staring into the distance. A few weep, not out of fear, but out of release. The fight is over. But the war is not. And for the prisoners now gathering in the heat of Bataan, a new journey is about to begin. One that will test them in ways the battlefield never did. One that will become one of the darkest chapters of the war in the Pacific. Because surrender does not mean safety. And the road ahead will be far more brutal than anything they have faced so far.